Thank you for joining Cancer Support Community Atlanta for this program. Please visit our website, cscatlanta.org, for a complete list of live and recorded events. We invite you to sign up for our newsletter to stay connected to all future programs.
My name is Lauren. I'm the program director here with Cancer Support Community Atlanta. Today we have Chef Kip. Chef Kip, what are you preparing today?
Today we are making a warm cabbage salad with butternut squash and shiitakes and a really fast, easy sweet potato pudding.
So we're so glad to have y'all all here today. As you know, we'll be able to sample everything at the end. We are recording this program today, so you're always welcome to shout out questions to Chef Kip along the way. But if you could limit table chatter to a minimum, because well, it'll be on YouTube with your chatter. So we're glad to have y'all, and at the end, we'll stop recording and we can all chit chat. But if you could silence your phones too, that would be great. And thank y'all for joining us. And Chef Kip, I'm turning it over to you now.
Thank you so much, Lauren. And thank you guys all for joining me today. I'm excited to have you. I see lots of new faces that I haven't worked with before and lots of returning faces that I'm happy to see back. So when I was thinking about planning for today, I was excited that we're finally in roasting season. As a person who cooks a lot, I do have a favorite cooking method, and roasting is it. I like how you can really develop a lot of flavors. I like how kind of hands-off it is. You can kind of just sort of shove it in there. And I was thinking about cabbage in particular because cabbage is kind of maligned, right? It is not the sexiest thing out there. But it can be so delicious, and roasting it is a really, really great method. The other thing I was thinking about when I was developing this dish was in thinking about wedges of things, was kind of that classic steakhouse iceberg wedge salad. So that's where I drew some inspiration. I am not going to tell you that this dining experience is going to be anything like eating a steakhouse wedge salad. It's very different than that. But I will say I drew a lot of inspiration, right? So your classic wedge salad, wedge of iceberg lettuce. It's got some sort of creamy dressing, sometimes ranch, sometimes blue cheese, usually has tomatoes, usually has bacon. So what I've done here today, what we're going to do today is roast our cabbage. We'll slice it into wedges. And we're using butternut squash. Now, the folks that got here earlier, we were talking a little bit about butternut squash and how it's a real bear to cut, right? Especially if you're tired or you don't have the sharpest knife. I am here to tell you that it's okay to buy it frozen already chopped up, because that's what I did. So that is an option to you. Last year I did a class that used delicata squash, and so if you're looking for something that's a little easier to cut and is a good substitution for butternut squash, delicata squash is nice. It doesn't have to be peeled. It's nice and thin-skinned, so it sort of looks like a little oblong sort of thing and has green and yellow stripes. So that's another good option for you. And then shiitake mushrooms. This is another thing I learned in feeding my children, that I could get them to eat more varieties of things if I made them crispy, especially vegetable-related things. I know mushrooms aren't a vegetable. Culinarily, we'll call them a vegetable. So I found that roasting shiitake mushrooms until they were kind of crispy, they would devour them. Now, I've heard people call this method shiitake bacon, and that doesn't offend my sensibilities necessarily, but I also will completely understand if you are a bacon-loving person who is like, this is not bacon, don't do that. But that was where I drew some of the inspiration from. And then we're gonna make a quick tahini dressing. We'll talk about that when we get to that. And while everything's in the oven roasting, we'll go down there and talk about our sweet potato pudding. So to get us started, we are gonna start with our cabbage wedge. And I'm actually gonna go ahead and move everything off my sheet pan so that we can put things on the sheet pan as we go. All right, so when we cut the cabbage wedge for roasting, or cutting cabbage for roasting, if you want to have a chance of it staying in a wedge, you want to leave the stem intact and just go from top to tail, right? So we'll cut it in half, and then we'll cut it in half again. And then what I also, when I was thinking about how to prepare this dish, I made it one time where I pureed the butternut squash. I cooked it and pureed it and made it sort of a sauce. And that was kind of fun, but it also seemed like an extra step and an extra pan to clean. And who has time for that? So I thought I reimagined it sort of as all one sheet pan situation. So when you're roasting vegetables, the thing that I see probably the biggest issue that people run into is overcrowding your pan, right? The beauty of roasting vegetables, besides that it's kind of hands-off, is that you get that sort of caramelized, toasty browning. That's what I love about roasted vegetables. And if your pan is overcrowded, you are steaming your vegetables, right? All of that liquid, it all just gets sort of piled up and you end up with more of a steam. And water impedes the browning. So we want to keep things spread out, and if you're making enough for more people, you might have to spread onto multiple sheet pans. The other thing that you're going to run into is that if you're doing multiple different things, I do kind of like to keep things segregated because not everything cooks all at the same time. And so, if you're tossing root vegetables together, that's fine. They're all going to cook pretty much the same. But depending on how much moisture is in something, whether you're using fresh or frozen squash, all of these things can make it so that you might want to pull something off the pan. It might be done, and then you want to stick everything else back in. So we are going to give our squash just a little, excuse me, that's not squash, that is cabbage. Our cabbage just a little drizzle. And then I like to flip it over so that it gets oil on both sides. All right. And then olive oil. But you can, use whatever you've got. If I'm wearing my dietitian hat, we like the fat profile of olive oil the best for all the good monounsaturated fatty acids. All right, and then we're just going to get everything, a little salt sprinkle. We kind of want to toss our butternut squash a little bit. And then we're going to finish with our mushrooms. We could actually make some real estate over here to get our mushrooms a little bit more. And salt. And you just kind of want to get everything an opportunity to sort of get well coated, and then spread everything out. So I have preheated the oven. In general, when I am roasting vegetables, I go with a pretty high temperature on my oven. So typically 400, 450, kind of depending on if I have a lot of volume or whatever. If it's something lighter, I might stick with 400, like I don't have as much volume in the oven, but if I got 2 full sheet pans, I'm going to go 450. You also kind of have to know your oven a little bit. I'm going to give these just a little bit more to try to see if we can get them as crispy as possible. And that's it, right? So we've got everything arranged on our pan, and we're just going to stick it right in the oven. I'm going to pull out the things that I have for our friends online can't see how many people we have in the room, but this amount of food is not going to feed everybody in here. So we will get that right in the oven. All right. So we are now going to get into our dressing. So I was sort of thinking about dressings that were kind of ranch-like. I will tell you this is not, I wouldn't call this a ranch dressing. But it's got some similarities to it in that, in general, if you're making a salad dressing, you're making a vinaigrette of some kind, you're going to have an acid. Today we're going to be using lemon juice. It could be vinegar as well. And I think even on the recipe I point out that sherry vinegar might be a good alternative. Again, using extra virgin olive oil. What's going to give this dressing the more creamy quality is tahini. Tahini is just sesame seed paste. It's used in hummus. That's probably where most people encounter it. And I've got over here on the corner, it turns out we had 3 different containers of tahini here. So it looks different depending on what store you're at. It might be in a different kind of bottle. I usually see it more in this kind of cylindrical can sort of thing, but I did see it in this squeeze bottle, which I've never used before. And my first thought when I put it in, I saw it in the squeeze bottle was, did they do something to it? Because tahini has a tendency, like natural peanut butter, to separate. But when you look at the ingredients, it is just sesame seeds. So I haven't actually opened this yet. I'm not sure if it does say shake well, which, like, if you just shook this, because I stirred it earlier today, it was it hadn't probably been touched in a month at least, and it was very separated, and it is like, you got to work it. I recommend a fork, actually. Like natural peanut butter. You really got to work it. All right, so our lemon juice, our olive oil, tahini, a little bit of maple syrup. I find that tahini, I wouldn't call it overly bitter, but it's got a little mild bitter quality to it, and I find that the maple syrup or honey or something like that is going to mellow that out. And then I've got miso. So miso is an ingredient that I love to use because it adds a lot of savory qualities to things. It's a Japanese fermented bean paste, and you can find it, this particular brand came from DeKalb Farmers Market. Somebody asked me earlier if it was gluten-free, and it usually is gluten-free. Like traditionally it's made out of fermented soy. Sometimes they do make versions that have barley in it, so you would want to watch out for that if that's a concern. But it's very salty, right? So you don't really need to add other salt in general. And then we're going to finish off with some garlic powder, onion powder, and smoked paprika. All right, so to get us kicking off, we're going to juice our lemons. I always like to give them a roll first. It really does make a difference in the amount of juice that you can get out of them if you want to maximize your juice. And then today I'm going to be making it with this immersion blender. You could put it in a regular food processor. You could put it in an immersion blender. A lot of times I will even say with other vinaigrettes that you can put them in a jar and shake it up, right? It's pretty low tech. You might be able to do this. With the tahini, it's going to be a little trickier. You might have to like give it a stir with a fork just to kind of get it incorporated. I think it would take a lot more work to shake this up because of the miso and the tahini. So if you've got an option to mechanically blend it, that's what I would recommend. Yeah? Sure, you could leave the miso out for sure. You probably would want to add some salt to it or soy sauce. The thing that I like about the miso is a couple of things. One, it's not going to give you a huge amount of probiotics, but it does have some probiotic quality to that, especially when you're eating it uncooked. It's the main ingredient in miso soup. It's also just nice to sort of have around. You just need to stir it into broth, and you've got miso soup. It's almost like if you were thinking about like an instant ramen noodle sort of situation. Oh, I already did all these. We'll just give it one more squeeze and see if we can get another teaspoon out. Yeah.
I put my muffins in the microwave.
Okay.
Is that, for like 30 seconds, and that kind of...
Yeah, it gives them some more juice.
Yeah.
I have heard of that. I don't ever do it. I don't know why. I think it's mostly because I lived in a kitchen for a long time that didn't have a microwave. It's not because I have anything against them. We just didn't have a microwave. And so from there, we're just going to dump everything in. Easy peasy. You can see, my tahini is not perfectly smooth, but by the time this immersion blender is done with it. Okay, so the other thing I find, and we'll see what happens when I put all this together, is that the couple of times that I've made this, I usually have to add a little water if I want it to be a pourable consistency. And that's really just a personal preference there. It kind of depends on, did you get the top sort of looser part of your tahini, or did you get the bottom sort of sludgy part? That's not a nice word. If you got the bottom thicker part, the thicker part is not what we want to say. I'm telling you, this is not going to taste like sludge. But if you've ever fought with the bottom of a jar of peanut butter, right, you know what I'm talking about. All right. I think I have a plug down here. I did not check to see if it would stay on camera. Yes. All right, so. Yeah. All right, so we're doing pretty good. I can already tell, though, that I'm going to want to get it just a little bit thinner. Yeah. How would you do it? A blender, a food processor, just, yeah, a regular blender would work fine. I'm using the regular blender for another recipe today, so I didn't have to clean in between. So yeah, I've got probably just a couple of tablespoons of water here. I'm going to add just a little bit more, almost. All right, there we go. All right, so yeah, it's pretty, you can see it's pretty pourable now. The amount of dressing that's in the recipe is going to be more than probably you're going to eat for, depending on how much you like it, I suppose, more than you're going to eat for the amount of food that we have in there, but you know, it's going to keep in your refrigerator for at least a week, and you can use it on other things, other roasted vegetables, other salads, etc., for the rest of your week. So, which reminds me, as I was developing this recipe, it's very easy for me when I'm sort of imagining things to kind of overcomplicate and overcomplicate and overcomplicate, right? If you just want to make some roasted cabbage, this is going to be tasty. If you want to make extra roasted cabbage to reheat later, right? You've got a whole cabbage, you want to go ahead and chop it all up and roast it all and use it in other things. I love making extra of something, not necessarily eating the same thing day after day, the same version of it, but sort of reinventing it. It's almost like I make extra on purpose with the idea that it's then going to be turned into something else. So, you know, we've got extra of salad dressing, and so now we've got this ready to go for a whole nother dish somewhere else in the week. We've got extra cabbage, and maybe that then goes in a stir fry tomorrow, or maybe it goes in fried rice, or maybe it goes in something else. The food editors at epicurious.com coined the term nextovers. I'm not going to claim it, but I love that term. It's different than leftovers, right? It's not just making a big lasagna and eating it day after day, which is a fine thing to do. But it's sort of doing half your prep work ahead of time, right? And so it does take a little bit of forethought to think, how am I going to use this if I have the extra? But I think it's really useful. So as I was mentally overcomplicating this recipe and adding more and more things, I thought, well, this can go a lot of different ways. So I have listed on here additional topping ideas. Quick pickled red onions is definitely something that I'm going to add. I added them to a dish here sometime last year, and people were really excited about it. It adds just a nice quick pop. If you're somebody who doesn't love raw red onions, I encourage you to try them after they've had a bath in some lemon juice, lime juice, or vinegar. It really takes the sharp, sulfury edge off of them. All right, yes, we have a convert over here. So quick pickled onions I thought was a nice idea. Croutons, if you have them, are a nice idea. Crispy roasted chickpeas would be yummy to add a crunch. Feta cheese, I mentioned. Toasted nuts. I got here and I was cleaning out the freezer of nuts. and using the odds and ends. So we have a toasted mixture of pecans, sesame seeds, and slivered almonds. I think that's everything that's in here. Yes?
When you were pickling them, how long you keep them in the vinegar or lemon juice? Do you add any salt?
Yeah, good question. So when I made the pickled onions, I made these last night. But I wouldn't say that you have to make them that far in advance. If I'm making tacos tonight for dinner, I'm going to do it first, and 15 minutes later, I'd be willing to put these on my taco. It doesn't really take very long. On the flip side, they will last in your fridge for at least a week. Yeah, do keep them in the refrigerator. They are quote unquote pickled. They're not really pickled. Yes? For the pickled onions, this is one, I'd say medium-sized red onion, and normally I would probably try to fill the jar with lemon juice, but I wanted to make sure we had enough lemon juice. So this one's only about halfway filled up, and so every now and then I just flip it over. You could if you wanted to, but you don't have to. No water. Again, those are all great things to do. You can. I did not. I just kept, it's lemon juice, and there is a little sprinkle of salt in there. That's also optional. The thing about acid, especially if you're trying to pay attention to the amount of salt that you're consuming, if you start to manipulate the sweetness of a dish, the acidic qualities of a dish, you'll find that actually less salt is needed. So when we get all this plated up, we're going to have some of the toasted nuts, and we're going to have some pickled red onion. You're welcome. Any other questions before I move on down to Sweet Potato Town? Okay. Here I am, whole other world. So I have made a version of a quick pudding, a chocolate version that uses silken tofu before. My dad really, really loves it. He is not somebody who cooks super regularly, but he started making it on his own because he loved it so much. And I love it for a couple of reasons. I love it for an oncology population because it is so easy, right? There's really no cooking. You just dump it all together. I love it because the tofu is going to give you a good amount of protein. So that's nice. When I tested this the other day, I had leftovers, and my children ate it for breakfast. They were super jazzed to eat it for breakfast. When you're buying your tofu for this recipe, it's very important that you get soft or silken tofu. If you get firm or hard tofu, you'll have kind of a chewy pudding. So silken or soft. This particular brand, which I think is made in Atlanta, called the Soy Shop, is called soft, but it's silken is usually what I'll see. All right, so to make this, we are going to start by toasting our little crust and putting our crust together. If I can get the stove to turn on. Maybe we're not going to toast it. We'll see if it wants to cooperate today. Got it. Okay. So we're going to heat up a pan over about medium-high heat. And then I've got a cup of oats and 3/4 of a cup of pecans. These pecans were the ones that we had. They happen to already be toasted, but I'm going to give them just a little bit more toasted flavor. And again, we're really just looking and smelling for things to get a little bit more fragrant and dark. It's just going to develop the flavor a little bit more. Aha. So yeah, it's on about medium high. I would not, and I'd stir fairly frequently. I wouldn't get too far from your stove. I have a habit of putting nuts onto toast, walking away doing something else. burning my nuts because they go from not done, not done, not done, done, overdone. Very, very quickly. So babysit them and stir them frequently. So we're just going to follow our nose. And in the meantime, we'll put the other ingredients in our blender for our crust. So the other crust ingredients that we have are a couple of tablespoons of flaxseed. I list this on there as optional. The flaxseed is ground up, and again, every opportunity here to have a tasty treat and dessert. When I'm wearing my dietitian hat, I also want to see if we can maximize the nutrients. So from a culinary standpoint, the flax seeds are going to add a little bit of a toasty, nutty flavor. From a nutrition standpoint, we really love all of the omega-3 fatty acids that are in flaxseed. Of note, however, when it comes to flaxseed, is that you cannot digest and access all of that good omega-3 fatty acids in flaxseed unless it is ground. So the flax seeds that they sprinkle on top of your loaf of bread is tasty and pretty, but you're not really deriving so much from that. It doesn't really matter. Either was fine. I have what I bought over here. It's pre-ground. It depends on how fast you go through it. So if you're using a couple tablespoons here and there, this, you might not go through this, and it will eventually. It'll take a while, but it will eventually can get rancid and kind of funky. It'll last longer as the seeds, and then you can sort of grind it as you use it. All right. You can put it in the refrigerator or the freezer. That helps. Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought that flaxseed mimicked what, estrogen in the body or something, and it wasn't a good idea for breast cancer survivors, or have you heard that?
Yeah, so there's a lot of sort of like confusing information out there about phytoestrogens. And in general, flaxseed is not something that we say to avoid at all. It kind of is, and again, I'm not an oncology dietitian, so I'm gonna kick that ultimately to my clinical colleagues. But I will say, yeah, it's confusing and it's scary, but general soy foods and flaxseed and this kind of stuff are not things that we need to really worry about. You're gonna get good. Yeah, even just the way phytoestrogens work in your body is not the same as estrogen in your body. Tofu, same.
Nutrition seminar on hormones and nutrition just about a week ago. It'll be recorded and be on our YouTube page very soon, but it answers everything.
Yay!
Tofu and soy and everything. So it's an hour-long presentation done by a Northside Oncology dietitian where she provides solid answers on all of those things. So
I love that.
YouTube page very soon, hormones and cancer.
Go check it out. I love that. All right, because this pan is hot and I want to get these guys out of here, for my next trick, the pan that we have happens to be cast iron, so I can't hold it with one hand. So we're going to carefully get these in here without spilling most of them on the counter. Thanks. See what happened when you told me I was doing a good job? It's okay. There we go. Thankfully, it wasn't too hot. All right, there we go. All right, so now you can kind of smell that those things got a little fragrant. All right, so, okay, we're going to do our couple tablespoons of flaxseed. I got a couple tablespoons of brown sugar. I got a couple tablespoons of almond butter. Peanut butter would work, any kind of nut butter that you like. This just sort of helps it make a little bit more cohesive crumble. Again, a lot of streusel or crumble toppings and a lot of recipes have butter in them, which is a fine thing to eat, but this is just gonna, you're just gonna get a more tasty, good fats in there from the nut butter. Trying to make everything work for us, Publix. It's usually with the peanut butter. Yep. Yep.
Do you feel almond butter is more nutritious than peanut butter?
I like to keep a variety around. I think that what to me is more important is any of the nut butters are great. Almond butter, I will tell you, is expensive, right? It's about twice as much as peanut butter. But again, the more variety you're getting in your fatty acid profile, in your colors of the fruits and vegetables that you're eating, and the varieties of whole grain, all of that stuff makes a difference, right? When we talk about nutrition, sort of the tenets of it, right, are moderation, which means you can eat the sort of guilty pleasures, if you will, in moderation. Variety, right? Those things are huge in nutrition. That's what we really preach the most, rather than you have to always do this or you have to never do that. Yeah. That's how we want to live. Now, I realized that I got almond butter on my teaspoon, so I'm going to get a fresh teaspoon out of the drawer. There we go. All right, to add in our spices and our vanilla. So I've got some ground ginger, ground cinnamon, and you could go truly any direction you want with your spices. If you like cloves and nutmeg, go in that direction. If you have the mixed up pre-mixed container of pumpkin spice, that works too. Allspice is the other one that I'm using. It's become a favorite of mine. So these are the ones that I picked out, but you get to do you. Oh, this is for later. All right, and then we're just going to give this a little bit of a pulse. It depends on if you have a gluten or nut allergy. So if you have a nut, let's talk about this. If you have a gluten allergy, you can buy oats that are gluten-free. Oats naturally on their own don't have gluten in them, but they are frequently processed in facilities that also process gluten-containing grains. So you can, if you are gluten intolerant, you can buy oats that are gluten-free. If you were omitting the nuts, sunflower seeds would be another good sort of nutty, toasty option in here. Yeah. And then again, like if you have a nut allergy, then sunflower butter is another alternative as well. That tends to be the direction that people go. When you have young kids in summer camp, you often can't send them with peanut butter sandwiches to summer camp, or even some schools, so sunflower butter is always hanging out at the back of my pantry for summertime. Yep.
So the dried ginger powder, is there, I usually supposed to use fresh, but what's a good place to buy dried ginger powder? There are bought a couple of places and I tried to rancid it, maybe it's sitting around too long. Is there a good source you have?
So the DeKalb Farmers Market is where I live close to, in Decatur. I wouldn't normally buy this much, but this was just the only size they happen to have. Usually they have it in the smaller container. This is probably more dried ginger than I would use in a lot of years. But also, let's see how much I paid for this. $1.66. Right. So I was like, we can afford it. We're going to be okay. And if you wanted to put fresh ginger in this, there's no reason you couldn't. You absolutely could. You absolutely could. Yep. All right, we're going to get loud. There was another question over here? So this is almond butter, and I bought it from Publix. I think it's even the Publix brand. But I'm using almond butter today. Somebody asked if if you had a nut allergy, what an alternative would be. Okay, so sunflower butter would be the thing to do. Good to know with a nut allergy that we can make your pudding without the topping. Regular grocery stores.
Oh, really? The sunflower butter too?
Oh, yeah. Near the almond butter and the peanut butter. Should be on the same aisle. Yep. All right, we're going to get loud for a second here. All right. Oops. I'm going to give this a shake so that it gets... Sometimes with blenders, I find that it's sort of like all or nothing, and I want this to be more crumbly, not like a full paste. So I'm going to pulse it. And I'm going to give it a shake to get things moved through. There we go. Okay, so with this crumble, you can kind of use it however you like, right? If you want to make a crust in whatever container you're using, that is fine. The way that I made them last night when I made the ones in advance is I just pushed a little in the bottom. I took about 1/4 cup or so and just pressed it in the bottom of my container to make it kind of like a crust. If you wanted it to just be a little crumble on top, that would be fine too. Right, so we're just gonna smush it down in there. All right, and then we're gonna put this over here. I do like a food processor. If I had a food processor for this particular thing, it just tends to make things a little looser and it doesn't get stuck in the bottom so much. So you could use dates to give it a little bit of the moisture that the nut butter. And I would also be, maybe back off on the sweetener, the sugar, because dates are really sweet. The blender. So we've got our silken tofu. It is going to have some water, some liquid in it. I usually just give it a slice and then drain it before I pull the lid off. We don't need all of that liquid. All right, and then you can see with the soft tofu that, it has a little bit more jiggle to it, right, than firm tofu. So we're just going to dump all this in here. All right, our sweet potato. So I do have roasting sweet potatoes is fine for some applications, but I find for this, or even just for just eating a sweet potato, if you're gonna have your brown sugar and cinnamon and whatever, I've found that steaming it or pressure cooking it makes it just much more silky, smooth, less fibrous. And so this is a sweet potato that I pressure cooked last night, and then just the skin on. I just chucked them all 4 of my sweet potatoes that I did last night in there. So this is just going to go right in here as well. Again, though, if you were roasting sweet potatoes for something else and you had this left over, there's no reason you couldn't use it. So we've got our tofu, our sweet potato. A little bit more miso again. So we've used miso in a savory application. Now we're using it in a sweet application. Let's see. Yeah, the vanilla. And I realized that I added the spices to the crust, which I didn't write in the recipe, and that's not the way I originally did it, but it's going to be great, extra spicy. So as the recipe is written for the crumble ingredients, it doesn't have the baking spices in it. I'm going to add it in both places. I'm going to do a little bit less than the full amounts. This is the pudding. Yeah, so it's the ginger, cinnamon, allspice. Same thing. It's just in both, it's in both places. I just realized that it's not written in both, but it's going to be tasty in both. I know, I have this whole container of ginger. Lauren, I feel like I need to take a full inventory before we write our next recipes. Like, we've got a lot of tahini we need to use. I'm going to get a gold star for using up the nuts out of the freezer. All right, so we're going to see how this behaves. I'm going to keep a little bit of water on hand, but just know we're probably going to have to scrape it down. But we're looking for a completely silky smooth puree, and a Vitamix is known for this thing, so we're gonna get there. All right, just to make sure everything's even, I'm gonna scrape it down. But yeah, we're on the way. And that's it. That's a sweet potato pudding right there. You just, with the silken tofu is like a little magic ingredient for making a pudding. And then from there, you can pour it right in your containers, right? You could eat this right away. There's no reason that you couldn't eat it right away. You could, if you want it to be set up a little more, you can put it in the refrigerator for an hour or so, and then you'll have a more set up version. We can, finish with a little extra sprinkle on top, right? So you got a layered effect. All right, let's check on our things in the oven. All right, this is looking good. All right, so we got our shiitakes. You see how much they transformed, right? They're much more bacon-like. We got our butternut squash with a little bit of browning on the edges. That's exciting to me, right? We got our beautiful cabbage wedges. They're going to be, a little bit of brown crispy on the outside, and on the inside, they're going to be nice and silky, right? This is exciting. All right, so now we get to just put it all together. All right, so this is going to get floppy. There we go. So we got our nice little wedge. We got our butternut squash that's got a little crispiness to it. Right, we got our shiitake mushrooms on here. And then we'll drizzle with a little of our dressing. Finish with some pickled red onions. Are they going to let go? Oops, don't put that back in there. And then, a little nutty crumble here. And maybe this is a side dish. Maybe this is dinner. If you throw some pulled rotisserie chicken, if you throw some chickpeas in there. Right? Look at that. Delish. Any other questions? Yeah.
Would you ever put parchment paper on the sheet pan?
Absolutely. That is a great thing to do. Save some scrubbing. I find You know, the butternut squash sometimes sticks a little bit. The cabbage doesn't usually mess up your pan too much, and the shiitake mushrooms, it depends. It depends on the day. But yeah, parchment paper's fine. Foil would work as well if you're trying to save on cleanup, for sure.
Thank you for joining Cancer Support Community Atlanta for this program. If you're interested in other live or recorded programs, please visit the online program tab of our website, cscatlanta.org, or follow us on Facebook.